Pokemon chess may be the least competitive game, but the additions of types to chess gives the game a whole new level of depth. In this video, I'll be explaining about the basics of how to build a good team in Pokemon chess. Now before I start preaching to you about the greatness of queen typing, you should know that to make this video, I consulted some of the best ranked players in the Pokemon chess Discord, and I happen to be the 8th best ranked player myself. So you can trust that this information isn't BS. Some of the information in this video may seem confusing to what your understanding of Pokemon chess is. If that's the case, understand the competitive meta is a month ahead of what the casual meta looks like on the website. This is due to all the top ranked players advancing the meta within the official Discord without any YouTubers with competitive Pokemon chess understanding to actually help the community learn to build a good team. And that's where I step in. Let's get started. If you're watching this video in the future and team building is now built into the site, skip this section. If you're here with me in the present, you'll know you only have 3 minutes to build a team, which is not enough time before a match to make a good one. To solve this problem, the community's come up with 2 main methods. For the first, make a private room and join it yourself from a second tab. Once you're fighting yourself, disconnect from the tab that has the piece color that you don't want to build with. You can now perma team build. The timer will drop below 0, allowing you to take as much time as you need. Just make sure when the game forces you to ready up that you hit unready. This method allows you to save your teams directly on the site with no extra work. The method I recommend is the team building spreadsheet made by Zephyr. Unlike the private room method, you can select any typing and easily see where weaknesses lie in your team. You are also able to share the spreadsheet with others so they can directly help you in the team building process. Finally, you gain the ability to write notes about your team in case you want to make edits later. Using this method, you still have to manually put the Pokemon into the website yourself, but referring to the spreadsheet ensures you won't be scrambling to make a balanced team at the last minute. So shout out to Zephyr. You can find his team building spreadsheet linked in the description. Now that we're making teams, you should know that the queen is the most impactful piece in the game. In the early games, queens are very threatening, as this is when they can use their range and typing to press a super effective chains without the threat of developed pieces. If you want queen recommendations, it depends on what you want out of the game and how good you intend to get at Pokemon chess. I made this tier list to showcase how easy it is to play different queens at different levels of the game. I personally recommend Ground and Fighting Queen because their game plan's pretty straightforward for beginners. Just get super effective chains to win. They also teach you the fundamentals of the game much better than most other typings. Queens can be loosely categorized into 4 different groups: super effective chains, kamikazes, counters, and flexible queens. Chain queens want a super effective chain as many pieces as possible into one another to gain an advantage. Kamikaze queens use their resistance to the opponent's king to force wins not normally possible. Counter queens pick queens specifically chosen to counter another queen in the metagame. They use their favorable typing to stop the opponent's queen from controlling the pacing of the game, allowing them to threaten pieces with little concern. Flexible queens are queens whose typing don't have any strong perks, but also don't have any strong weaknesses, allowing them to threaten pieces with little concern. I made a choice to categorize each queens based on the playstyles that they fall under. Keep in mind, many queens can be played in multiple ways, and more strategies will evolve as time goes on. Rock Queen, for instance, can be played as a kamikaze queen, but also does a really good job of threading super effective chains. If you like to explore any of these playstyles, the higher up a queen is in the list, the easier it is to play. To keep this video short and simple, I won't be doing a tier list on how good I think each queen typing is. Also, the meta will change over time, and I like this tier list to remain useful to you without outdated info. Thus, no tier list in this video will consider type viability, but will rather consider how difficult types are to learn to use. But I will be making a separate queen tier list video to be coming out in the near future. But I know what you want.
Bryce, what if I just want to win?
Well, you dirty tier picker, if you want to teach your opponent pain and despair, if your mind finds joy in the idea of victory with zero creativity or originality, if you live only to see the anguish of those around you, go ahead, pick Ground Queen. But I will be judging you. The most important piece in the game is the king, because if your king gets taken, you lose the game. Good kings are able to hit many types for neutral damage, hit common queens and rooks for super effective damage, and have immunities to common offensive typings. For these reasons, Ghost King is currently the best king in the game. It's immune to Fighting Queen, hits the most types in the game for neutral damage, and only loses to Dark. Other good kings include Water King, Ground King, and Flying King. This tier list ranks how easy each king is to learn to use. Going forwards, I won't be talking about piece typing in too much detail, because usually teams are built around your queen and your king, and the usefulness of pieces from there on are dependent on your queen and king typing. So looking at teams from a synergy standpoint makes more sense. Bishops are best used to control space and threaten free pieces offensively. Bishops with good, not very effective matchups can prevent more valuable pieces from moving where they want to. For instance, if a Celebi moves in front of a ground queen, the ground queen can't take the Celebi because the grass resists ground, forcing the ground queen to move out the way. Additionally, unlike in normal chess, super effective matchups can prevent pieces from moving in the sights of a bishop even when defended. Bishops can also threaten super effective pins, winning a free piece by threatening to take a more valuable piece behind it using a super effective matchup. This tier list shows how easy each bishop is to learn to use. Knights are best used to control space and threaten free pieces defensively. They prevent pieces from infiltrating your defenses, as moving into a knight's attack pattern never threatens an attack against a knight, unless done by another knight. Knights are also good at threatening super effective forks, utilizing their ability to jump over pieces and unique attack pattern to apply pressure in ways other pieces can't. In general, you don't want your knights to have too many weaknesses to common types, as a knight's unique attack pattern cannot solo a queen that moves to attack it. This tier list showcases how easy each knight is to use. Knights and bishops also protect your pawns by defending and using attacks and acting as shields. Both bishops and knights can also be used to block rook and queen attacks when they resist the attacking type, because knights and bishops are less valuable pieces. Additionally, bishop and knight types shouldn't just be selected based on how good they are and whatever the meta is at the time. For instance, if you're running Ghost King, you might choose to run Fighting Knight because it resists Dark Queen, which Ghost King struggles against, even though Fire Knight is a better piece individually. This is what I mean when I say piece synergy. Types that resist common king typings and have few not very effective or no effect matchups are the most important feature for rooks. For instance, Steel Rook is good because it resists 11 typings in the game, 2 of which are Fairy and Flying King, being some of the better kings in the game. If your rook can't take a pawn in the end game, then you're probably gonna lose the game. Fighting Rook, for instance, can hit 5 types for super effective damage, but can't hit 5 types without trading due to not very effective matchups, many of which are common pawn typings. It also can't even touch Ghost Pawn, let alone Ghost King. A less important but still important note is rooks don't want to be weak to common king typings, so they can threaten kings one square away from them when defended by other pieces. Here's how easy each rook is to use. This next section is probably the most important for beginners, because a weak pawn structure allows a strong enemy queen attack. Remember when I said no more type tier lists? Yeah, I lied. Here's how pawns rank up in terms of viability. Pawn viability is based on the types they resist and take neutral attacks from. Try to use pawns higher up on the list if they're still available. To build a good pawn structure, make sure you don't have chances for super effective chains. To do this, first make sure your pawns directly next to each other don't share any common weaknesses. Next, make sure your pawns and pieces directly behind them don't share a weakness. Next, avoid having a lot of pieces in your back row that share weaknesses right next to each other. Now, note that pieces in the back row can share common queen weaknesses if once they are in the game, they would not be on the same side of the board. For instance, if your team runs Flying Knight and Ground Bishop, and once they are out into the game, they would both be on the king side of the board, your king side of the board would now be weak to Ice Queen. If you struggle with getting past the first few turns, then I recommend not having pieces right next to each other that share common queen weaknesses. In the current meta outside the Discord, this would look like fighting ice and ground queens, but this is sure to change as time goes on. If you struggle getting through the middle game, but have already begun getting past the early game with no problems, then it's likely that you have minor pieces on the same side of the board once they're developed that share a common weakness. Note that a minor piece does not include pawns. Do not have pawns next to each other that share common weaknesses. And finally, avoid having pawns that share weaknesses with the other pieces immediately next to them. Though this may be the end for team building for each piece individually, there's one game-changing team building strategy found by Robunny R and Oliver called Friend Guard. This term describes when a rook has a pawn in front of it that, if taken, does not allow a queen to take the rook without losing the opponent their queen, like Fairy Pawn and Steel Rook. If Steel or Poison Queen try to take Fairy Pawn, they can't take Steel Rook with the following attack, as Steel is immune to poison and resists Steel. Good Friend Guard pairs will be on the screen now. Wide Guard is an expansion of Friend Guard, which makes it such that both rook pawns defend the rook from being taken by a queen the pawns are weak to. Now, utilizing Friend Guard or Wide Guard in team building isn't necessary. For Wide Guard especially, it may be much harder to balance your team depending on the queen and king type you selected, because there'll be less types available for other places. Despite this, I do recommend Friend Guard for the majority of teams, but don't feel like you have to use it. One final thing to consider when building teams are the H and the F pawns. An early game win discovered by Star Chess and named by Nico called Having Fun occurs when the H and F pawn share a weakness to a queen. Under this scenario, if the opponent has the queen that is good against both these pawn types and moves to the H5 squares white or the H4 squares black, it is a guaranteed win, as you threaten the E pawn, which is only defendable by pushing the G pawn. After it's pushed, you can slip behind your enemy's defenses to win the game. Unless you're unlucky, then you blunder your queen to a miss. Make sure your team isn't having fun at whatever the queen meta is at the time that you're watching this. With all these steps done, you should now have a great team build. In this final part of the video, I'll be showcasing some teams you guys can take inspiration from, or just steal, and explaining why they work. Do know, however, if all of you guys steal these teams just bar for bar, people will just start building counters to specifically these teams. In this section of the video, I'll be going over 4 teams I made for beginners and what they're good at, what they're bad at, where their weaknesses lie, how to play around those weaknesses, and if you want to make any changes to the teams, where they can be made most easily. So first up, we have a Ground Queen team. Note that it's weak to Ice Queen on this square here, as Ice Queen can come here and take the Grass Bishop afterwards, but When you're in a situation like this, it's not too difficult to play around when it comes to the pawns 1 square from the edge. If you push the dragon pawn, Ice Queen can take the dragon pawn, but can't take Ghost without getting taken by Dark here. You're also weak to Electric Queen, where this water pawn is. If Electric Queen comes here, it can then take this bishop, and Flying King can't take back without losing to Electric Queen. Similarly to this side, all you gotta do, push the water pawn 1 square, and Electric Queen can't do anything anymore. Steel Queen, on the other hand, has a completely different thing going on with this team. Steel Queen can take this fighting pawn and then can't get taken by Flying King. So to go around this, I have this Fire Knight here, which resists Steel to help kind of chase it around the board, prevent it from going to any of these 3 squares once it develops, hopefully give you enough time to castle. And of course, this team is weak to Ground Queen. I have this thing on this team where I have 2 pieces right next to each other that share a weakness, but as I explained earlier, depending on when your skill level is in the game, that might not matter too much. If you are a very fresh beginner though, and you're like really struggling with Ground Queen, you can swap out this Rock here for Bug or Ice. Just know if you do either of those, you will be more weak to Fire, as both of your bishops will now be more weak to Fire Queen. But if you run Bug, you'll be less weak to Ground Queen because Bug resists Ground. Finally, Ground can get in on this Electric pawn here, but this Ghost Knight is here to defend it because the only thing that Electric loses to is Ground. So by having a knight that isn't weak to ground, you can defend against that. I also like to put what types my team doesn't have, like you can see right here in the notes, so that if I want to change the team up at all, I don't have to go looking around for whatever pawns or pieces aren't on the board. Next up, we have a Fighting Queen team. I have Fairy Pawn right here so that Dark Queen can't jail Ghost King. I also have 2 main weaknesses on this team. The first being Fighting. Fighting wants to get it on this normal pawn here, and then it can just take Dark or take Rock, depending on, you know, what the pieces are looking like in the back row at the time. Just with the other team though, just push normal pawn, not a problem anymore. This team's also weak to Rock Queen because once Fire Knight develops, you'll have 2 Rock weak pieces right next to each other, which can be kind of annoying, but you can choose not to develop this Fire Knight, and you can block with your Fighting Queen if you see it early enough. Besides that, if you have any types you're particularly scared of, like I said, Ground, you can always swap this out for Bug or Ice. Same thing for this piece, but no, if you put Ice here, you will now have 2 pieces weak to Steel, which I cannot recommend that you do. I'd also like to know that this team is weak to Ice. If you look, you have a Ground, Flying, and Grass here. If you are more scared of Ice than say Fighting or Rock, the bishops are something that can be swapped out pretty easily here. But it's also important to note that Ice really isn't that good of a typing. It's like top of B tier in my opinion when it's on the Queen. So I don't expect Ice to remain too much more common after you guys take this information on how to like build teams better. Next up, we got a Rock Queen team. It's weak to Ice on the left side here once Flying and Ground develop, but again, that's up to you if you care more about earlier mid game. Also, 3 of the 4 minor pieces here are weak to Rock. If that concerns you, again, you can swap this with Grass or Bug, but no, by swapping with Grass, you will be more weak to Ice. I'd also like to note Flying Knight here. One thing I like doing is pairing Flying Knight next to Dark Rook with a Poison here, because Poison resists fighting, so it can't get, you know, super effective chained, but it has a problem with Ground. But by putting Flying here, there's just no way Ground can even get in if you push Psychic. And finally, what I consider the hardest team to use on this list. As a matter of fact, I wouldn't even consider it truly a beginner team. But if you're just on the cusp of that beginner level and are finally comfortable moving in saying, I think I am a good player, this might be the team for you. The biggest thing that is a problem on this team is, as I said earlier, for beginners, I cannot recommend having 2 weak Steel pieces right next to each other. I don't think Steel Queen is that great. If I had to guess, it's like an A tier, but it's not as common as say Ground Queen might be, or even many other queens, just because Steel Rook is also just great. And I think people opt for Steel Rook more than they would opt for Steel Queen. But if that does concern you, you can swap this with Bug, or even swap Grass over here and put Rock on this side. You're also weak to Fighting Queen, again with this normal pawn, but if that's a concern, push 1 square. Ground Queen, push 1 square. What I would like to note is, because this is a jail team, when you get Dark Queen out developed, if you see that they don't have a fairy pawn right here and they're running Ghost King, you can move your Dark to either this square or this square to threaten it and just win the game very early on. Very, very early on. One last thing I did forget to mention earlier. There's a huge Bug weakness right on this corner, but that would only be exploitable by Bug Queen. And Bug Queen, in my opinion, is the worst queen in the game. If that concerns you, again, you can swap this with Bug, you can swap this with Rock. I think you get it at this point. But since Bug is such an uncommon queen type, and in my opinion, the worst queen type, sometimes I will put Psychic and Dark or Psychic and Grass right next to each other, knowing I have the weakness there just because I don't respect it enough. But if that's something you're concerned about, Now you know. And remember, if you just yoink these and you lose because people start counter building you, that is a skill issue. That is not my problem. I wish you the best of luck. Let's cut it back to the other part. Before you leave the video, if you want to learn how to play ranked or want direct help team building, stick around for a bit longer. If not, thanks for your time, and I can't wait for the skill level of this game to increase. In the opening of the video, I mentioned I'm number 8 on ranked right now. To play ranked, join the official Pokemon Chess Discord and scroll down to the ranked queue channels. To join matchmaking, type /join ranked matchmaker or /join ranked randoms depending on your preferred game mode in their respective channels. You can then ping the ranked matchmaker role or ranked randoms role to find other players to play ranked with. A bot will put you in a private channel to report match scores. You can also play friendlies against people in the Discord server in this channel here. The Discord also has a team building channel where you can get direct help from other players in making a team that doesn't immediately get bodied by Ground Queen, which let me tell you is still that good at top level play. If you want more advanced team building strategies, tips and tricks, tier lists, or maybe you like Smash Bros, or maybe you just find me dashingly handsome, please tickle that subscribe button and drop a like, because I would love to have you in the community. Thank you for watching. A special thanks to everyone who's on screen right now who helped in some way to make this video possible, and I hope you enjoyed it. And remember, never use ice or rock pond. Bye!